Let me ask a question.
Hmm.
You just taught me something, and I'm sure other people are gonna pick up on this warrior gene.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I trust your intellect and your research, so I'm not gonna question you about that. But within this warrior gene, is there any information or data that says that you grow out of that as well?
You don't. Not that I've seen, but the information, it's there, but I don't know that you grow out of it in as much as how do you explain it? Different enzyme. Oh, this is an enzyme, right, in your brain. So, and it's responsible for this excessive amount of violence that you might crave. So, I don't know if you can grow out of it in as much as you might crave less violence if it's not as active, if there's not a trigger. So it sounds all over the place. It's still, a work in progress when it comes to the research on this. It's MAOA, um, warrior gene, monoamine oxidase A is what it stands for.
Okay.
Um, but I don't know that you can just grow out of it. I just think it kind of doesn't transcend, but you might be able, if you, as you get older, you might be able to get a violent fix off of watching more graphic films, maybe, or, I'm not too sure.
I was just wondering because me being a person that was a juvenile offender charged as an adult, many laws that were passed to relieve some of the punishments of the justice system on people like me.
Hmm.
And a big part of the legal and scientific evidence that they used to go all the way to Supreme Court was that the brain physically does not develop all the way like another muscle or organ until an age range of 24 to 26 years old.
That's
So I
right.
was wondering,
Hmm.
I wasn't even really pushing back on the idea. I was just wondering because some of that, if that's a gene, that's a
Hmm.
science.
Hmm.
And I was just wondering if they had any data on that. But let's not get too much into science. I want to get into some more journalism. And I want to ask you, how did you come to the point? I know you said that you had a journalistic interest in some people that were serial killers and so forth and so on. But how
Hmm.
did you come to the point where you made contact with Dan Riley? How did that journalistic relationship arise?
So there was an individual who had let me know that there was an FBI agent who was interviewing another FBI agent on the whole Alpo story. And at the time, I was interested in how, I was just interested in the drug um, trade and how, things happened in the 90s, especially since growing up seeing it and then actually researching it are two different things. So I was like, okay, I listened to the podcast that the FBI agent had where she's interviewing another FBI agent. I'm like, okay, well, got the name and I was like, okay, screw it. I'm just going to contact him. And so I reached out. He had his information on his webpage, sent him an email, and he responded back and please give me a call and followed up with a phone call and did an interview with this other individual initially. And then after that interview was done, I wasn't satisfied with it, but I was like, okay, that wasn't my interview. I wanted to do my own separate interview with Dan because there were questions that I wanted to ask that the other individual just wasn't trying to ask. I wanted to
Oh,
know
this was a joint interview.
initially. Yeah.
Okay.
Initially, the first interview with Dan was a joint interview with that other individual who you and I know. And
Okay.
that person did not ask, he didn't dig deep. He was more or less concerned with, oh, hey, I was there.
Oh, he was only focused on one aspect of interview dimension, so to speak.
Yeah, he was.
All right.
And it was more gassing himself up for being there amongst these individuals than anything else. I
Yeah,
want
so technically it wasn't journalism. It was almost like locker room talk.
it was. It
Okay.
was. And I was just like, that's not, I didn't get any information out of that. I didn't, and I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm gonna interview him again. And I called him up and I said, hey, can I just interview? I have some more questions. And I developed rapport with Dan, and he's a nice person. And I asked him about his background. I wanted to know, well, how did you get started? Like, why would the president? appoint you to be in charge of this Safe Streets Task Force? Who are the other people? Was it just an FBI task force and you guys are just going after these quote unquote bad guys that had, politicians scared to come to work? Who were the bad guys? Tell me about these rival crews in DC. Tell me what you know. And he didn't mind talking about it. He's a Vietnam vet and he didn't mind discussing how he got started and how he got started. He took me through the process of the different crews that he had to bring to justice, as well as how it ended. And I said, okay. And I just kept going back when I had more questions, as I read and pulled stuff off of Pacer, compared it with, what was on newspapers, and I learned, reporters will take artistic liberty and write a narrative that matches whatever the newspaper slant is or however they feel. I want the truth. And I know that there are three sides to every story, and I had one side. I was going to get Dan's side, and then I had to make my own judgment as to what the truth could be in reference to the whole Alpo situation. And that was different than when I asked them about Wayne, because I've not had the opportunity to interview Wayne yet, so I only have one side of that story.
But have you held any exclusive journalism that you've able to cultivate from those conversations with them? They took a lot of the things from Dan Riley and just ran with the Outpost story because I guess the Outpost story is more culturally popular, or so to speak, right? But did you hold anything that's exclusive? And we don't have to go into it now, but did you hold anything exclusive from these Safe Street Task Force and Dan Riley interviews?
Oh yes, yes, absolutely.
And the formation of the Safe Street Task Force. Did you ask any of those questions before we get into like some of the characters that they went after?
I did. I asked that first because I didn't understand it. I'm like, okay, what's the Safe Streets Task Force? Was it started during the Reagan administration? Who administered it? Who appointed it? So I guess it was started under was it Clinton, the Clinton administration, and it was a task force made up of DC police and FBI agents. So that's why they worked together jointly in order to curb the violence. And it was also an initiative that was backed by Mayor Marion Barry at the time. Yep, and also he gave me some information directly on it that he received. So the last interview I did with him last year, he gave me a lot of information that he had that came from that task force, not from
DC based, right? DC
DC.
area, DC region based.
Absolutely. Yep.
When you talking to him as a journalist, what names or crews came up at the top of the list that he may have mentioned that you didn't have to dig for?
Our street crew, because that was the first, like that was, I guess, one of his top. No, that was his first violent crew assignment, I guess, if I'm saying that correctly. Um,
Drug crew with probably violence in it.
yes, that's it. That's it. Thank you. K Street crew. Um, he was really, I think, out of that crew came Wayne Perry. I think.
That's true.
K Street crew.
Were those the people or groups that he mentioned and referenced frequently?
That was what he started out the gate with it. Like he comes right out with, because that was what his first, he was tasked with some jewelry heist thing. That's his first, foray from into the, as an FBI agent. So it was connected to Neiman Marcus, and it was a nationwide thing that started out of California. And this crew of people, I don't have their names, but if we're ever in another interview, I'll be more prepared and be able to give you the names. They were hitting up Neiman Marcus's left and right, and they did hit up Neiman Marcus in the DC area, and it was an interstate thing. So he ended up being a part of a team that brought those robbers, and it was pretty big. It's in the Post, and it was pretty big in 84, 83, 85, something like that. And so from that point, he had to connect like violence. There was violence going on in the city. Of course, a lot of drugs going on in DC, and he wanted to kind of stay more local. He'll probably respond in your comments if I say anything wrong. And it led him to our street crew and investigating the violence in our street crew, excuse me.
In your interview,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't want you to go into too much detail.
Yeah.
In your interview, as a journalist, and you've interviewed street guys,
Yeah.
criminal figures, and law enforcement figures.
Yeah.
What impression did Dan give you in the department of authenticity and
Mm-hmm.
him really knowing what he was talking about, as opposed to the orders or the paperwork that he get to go investigate somebody? What was your impression of him really knowing what he
Mm-hmm.
was talking about?
I was really impressed, to be honest with you,
Okay.
because he was very knowledgeable of a lot of things, which meant that he took time as a law enforcement official to go and do his research, to immerse himself into the culture. Now, Dan is a Vietnam War vet who's from Alabama. So, when you know that, and knowing that he came up to DC and immersed himself in this culture and history, I mean, he knew all, like, law enforcement should, I feel like if they're doing their job, they should know. But I mean, of course, I don't know that he knew everything, but I was pretty impressed that he knew a lot and could, that was his job. This was way before we had the technology that we had before. Then it wasn't just about the policy for him when I interviewed him. It was always about keeping people safe, even when it came to, dare I say, some of those snitches that came in that ended up dead. That was going to happen. Right. We knew that. And, he did what he could to protect them, but ultimately he was pretty honest with the work that he did. And the purpose was to keep people safe. And in lieu of the fact that on the flip side of the coin, at the time in the 80s and 90s, and even today, there's a lot of people, not just people, but a lot of Black people that go into the district. And he didn't target Black people in the district.
Oh, yeah? What makes you believe that?
Not just some of the workers. I don't believe that he was doing what we see now, going after anyone who fit the description. Now, I did read in one of the, I'm looking over there because I have one of those reports from the Marion Barry administration, where they would list in their annual reports, they list some of the issues that they may have had with local police. There may have been a few, and I did see a few local police officers who targeted people who may have fit the description in the 80s and 90s for sure. I did see
definitely profiling.
Yeah, I did see that. With him, they were zeroed in on our street, and from our street, zeroed in on Wayne. So
yeah, so from your interviewing him and basically your investigation of the matter, from whenever they first investigated the DC crew, no matter what happened in that investigation, Wayne's name still popped up. This investigation.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy because he said that, when you talk with him, it's pretty funny where the city was so terrified of Wayne that they would get the anonymous tips. Wayne did it. Even now, this man is an ADX. Wayne was responsible. One man was responsible for all the crime in the city in the 80s and 90s until he got locked up. Dang. But, they, yeah, his name would always come up. If ever there was someone who would be the equivalent of beyond, the Gaudis or whatever of crime of I guess being a hitman is Wayne Perry, and that's nationwide, and he wasn't affiliated with any of the gangs that we hear today, right? This man, that's saying a whole lot, even though it's not saying something good, but it's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, in the context of them, the authorities and the media.
Absolutely, sure.
From my impression of Dan Riley, he can sit and talk sports with criminals, right?
Oh yeah.
And what I mean by that is some people can say, "Oh, Allen Iverson had this much points last night. LeBron James had this much points. I've seen him in interviews where he can talk about these people as if he knows them in his head. So I want to ask you, can he really shoot from the hip about these stories, or was he a guy that had to refer to notes?
Oh, no notes. He never had notes. Oh my God, no, no. He was just talking like he was reliving each and every moment of whether he let me into a bird's eye view of the investigation he did. He wanted to talk about that, or that going on a heist, the stakeouts. I mean, he never had notes. I was taking notes.
How did he view Wayne? Like, I know that they're from two different walks of life, and I'm not asking a question like, did he admire him? Was he caught up with him? But in the profile or the capacity of a criminal suspect, where did he rank Wayne in seriousness? I'm not asking you a dangerous question. I'm talking about, some criminals, law enforcement, oh, he was a little, nickel and dime guy. Yeah, he was violent, but did you get any gauge on where he ranked Wayne in seriousness or, priority as opposed to who we have to get?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, yeah, he definitely ranked him as at the top of his game when it comes to the criminal career that Wayne was in, if that makes sense. He didn't look at Wayne as some nickel and dime guy. He didn't look at Wayne as some little hopper that was just playing around. Very serious, very, very serious. I don't think he admired him, but him and Wayne talking, they would do this dance, kind of stuff you see written on some of these cop shows, but some of those actors kind of overdo it. I want to say that maybe because of his training as a Vietnam War vet, their training is way different than the military trains veterans now. So I would think, and forgive me for saying this, that you got to understand the criminal element and have once been immersed in it at some point in some facet in order to connect with a personality like Wayne Perry. And I think through the Vietnam vets did a lot of stuff that they will never talk about, which is why a lot of them are suffering mentally. And Dan's not suffering mentally. I'm just saying that I think he understood a lot because he may have seen a lot while serving during Vietnam.
I seen some of your content with Dan on the guy from Detroit's platform. I don't even want to say his name, but how did that? How was he able to get content of yours that was exclusively yours and copyrighted? And was any of that content that he put out, was any of that content exclusive? Matter of fact, I want to just leave it there. Was any of that content exclusive?
It was exclusive. He took it, and he took it from that third party whose name I'm not mentioning.
Okay.
Because that person had access to my Google Drive because I was doing a project with him and this other young woman out of DC who was in New York. And he had access to my exclusive content. And that was one of the exclusive interviews that I had done with Dan. And when I confronted that guy from Detroit, of course, he was just like, oh, well, I got it from so and so. Well, so and so didn't own it, but YouTube sided with him. I have that content copyrighted. And he didn't get my permission to use it. And so I can sue him for it, and I probably will. But yeah, that was exclusive content that was mine. That was not on any joint interview with that other individual. And the other individual did not have the right to take it or syndicate it without my permission.
So, as we move forward, you still have some Dan interviews that are exclusive, though, right?
Oh yeah, yes.
So we can look forward to some of that content on your YouTube channel, right?
Yeah, we can. Yep.
And what is the name of your YouTube channel, the one that you use for your journalism?
True Crime Mogul.
Okay, so I'm gonna get that in there. Now, I don't want to ask you too much about Dan because I want us to go into some of that stuff, just exclusively. But I do appreciate your time and you talking about the whole matter with Dan and some of these other guys. I don't want to beat it too much down because I want us to do some of those things individually. But let me ask you, I think I know the answer, but in a journalist way, who, what crew or individual did you discuss with Dan that you took the most journalistic interest in?
Well, that's an easy one. It was Wayne, because at the time I was working on my thesis and I wanted to get as much information as possible that would not necessarily be in the court records, because Dan did many, 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 many interviews with Wayne. And even after Wayne had been, I guess, indicted and sentenced and sent off to prison, he had did like other interviews, because for Dan, he had mentioned he wanted to give some of those families closure if there were any other alleged murders that Wayne committed that he wouldn't mind giving the families closure on. And so Wayne Perry admitted to certain ones. I don't have that listing to give, but I thought that was pretty admirable. He didn't have to. He could have just said, "Yeah, I don't care. I killed your family member, and who cares?" But he gave some people closure.
Okay. With that being said, I'm gonna conclude this one right here, man. And I appreciate your time, and hopefully we could go deeper into some of these interviews about some of these. I'm gonna call them subjects.
Thank you. Thank you so much for interviewing me. I appreciate it.
All right. Talk to you next time.